Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about skill gap in Call of Duty. Three things revolving around skill gap. We're going to talk about the factors that impact skill gap. We're going to be talking about which Call of Duties have the highest skill gap. And finally, the most important thing, we're going to talk about why I think it's important for a Call of Duty to have a larger skill gap. The reason I want to talk about this is because honestly, Modern Warfare 2 doesn't really feel like it's going in the direction of having a larger skill gap. Now, not completely, it's not like it's the lowest skill gap COD ever, but it definitely doesn't feel like it's on the higher end either, and I really just wanted to talk about why I feel like it needs to be much bigger. First of all, what factors play a role in skill gap? The biggest factor by far is definitely time to kill. Now, a lot of people have had arguments with me about this in the past, and I still stand by my opinion that a slower time to kill will increase the skill gap. Now, of course, there's an extent to this. You can't just keep increasing the time to kill and then expect it to also increase the skill gap. It has to be balanced with the rest of the game, but generally speaking, when the time to kill is slower, the game mostly will have a larger skill gap. This is because when the time to kill is a bit slower in Call of Duty, and I mean for Call of Duty standards, I'm not talking about like Halo time to kill, I'm talking like 250 to 300 milliseconds like it is for some of these slower time to kill Call of Duty games. When you have this slower time to kill in Call of Duty, you're actually going to have gunfights. You're actually going to have situations where your accuracy is really important as well as your movement. Now, of course, you still have those situations when the time to kill is fast, just not as frequently. When the time to kill is faster, you're going to be getting in situations more often where you get killed without you being able to react to it. And of course, that could sometimes be your own fault. Of course, if like you hear footsteps behind you and you just don't even realize there's someone behind you and you get killed, yeah, that's your fault. But there's many times where someone just spawns behind you and they shoot you from behind and there's nothing you can do about it because the time to kill is so fast to the point where you can't react to that. Or someone could just randomly come across you, maybe they have dead silence and they didn't outgun you, they didn't outflank you, they just came across you because they got lucky. So they didn't have better skill than you and that's why they took you out. They just took you out because they got lucky. Or you could also have a situation where someone's literally just camping in a room, aiming their gun at the doorway, waiting for you to walk in. And because you're not trying to play the game incredibly slowly, which is usually what fast time to kill makes the game play like, because people start getting worried about stuff like this happening, so they'll slowly enter into different rooms. You're gonna have the situation, you walk in the room, someone shoots you, you're dead. There's nothing you can do about it, there's no way you can react to it. But when time to kill is slower, all of those situations, you have the ability to react back. Now, of course, if that player shooting you first is still a good player, they should be able to finish you off and it wouldn't change anything, right? But that player at least was good. He deserved, or he or she deserved that kill. And if that player happened to be really bad, well, now you have the ability to actually fight back if he's missing his shots, or he doesn't have to be bad. He could just be not performing that well in that moment. Maybe he's missing his shots or his movement's not very good. He's kind of very still. Now you have the ability to pull 180 and shoot back and actually kill him before he's able to kill you. That takes skill. That adds another layer of skill into gunfights, whereas before there just wasn't as much there. And the whole movement point adds into my next factor that goes into the skill gap would be, of course, movement. I do believe faster and just overall more frantic movement does increase the skill gap. Now, there's a lot of conversation about movement right now because Modern Warfare 2 did seem to kind of slow down the movement just a little bit. It's not like crazy slow, it's still fast to a degree, but it definitely isn't as fast as some other Call of Duty games, and a lot of people have been talking about that. I do believe when the movement is more frantic and fast, that does take more skill because it's not easy to move around fast while also being able to hit your targets and be accurate and fire back at people while, hitting all your shots. So that is why it takes more skill. A lot of people will always say like, oh, it doesn't take skill to run around fast and slide cancel and do all these crazy movements. Like, people always say that, but no, it actually kind of does, because if you're able to do all that and you're able to still kill people, point them out and still kill, that takes skill, that does. So when they slow things down and it's more like just going around corners slowly, just kind of like aiming down, it's definitely less skillful and it's more about, who's going to shoot first, who's going to get the luckier line of sight and stuff like that. And yeah, there's map knowledge involved there. I'm not saying there's zero skill involved in this more tactical version of Call of Duty, but it definitely does feel like it's less than you would have if the movement was really fast and frantic. Hence why the advanced movement games, there was a lot of skill gap there because people were doing a lot of crazy movements, and being able to exo jump while still being accurate with your shots, that definitely takes some layer of skill. And as I just talked about map knowledge there, that's another thing I want to talk about is the map design plays a big role in this skill gap. I think when a map is designed in a way more like controlled way where you kind of have some layer of predictability on where the spawns are going to be, and there is a way to control certain sections of the map, I do think that is going to lead to a higher skill gap. Whereas when you see maps like mostly Modern Warfare 2019's maps where they're more random, they just feel overly complex, yeah, it's going to be harder to learn the map, sure, but that's not really going to make a difference because there's so many different places, there's so many different places to flank, there's so many different windows. It's not going to be enough for anyone to fully be able to grasp where an enemy's going to be at every point in the match. So there really is no way to fully control the map and find some predictability in where the spawns are going to be when you have this really crazy complex map design that doesn't really have a design to it. So I do think maps that are more three-laned, more competitive feeling maps, the maps you tend to see in the competitive rotation, those tend to be the maps that are better for increasing the skill gap. And there are definitely enough of those maps every COD, but then we also sometimes see them throw in a bunch of maps that definitely go in the direction of just lowering and lowering the skill gap. And there's definitely some other factors that play a role as well. I'm not going to go into every single little detail, but there's certainly a bunch of little things that do play a role. I can even just say the minimap changes that they made. I do think that is decreasing the skill gap for Modern Warfare 2. So that's a big thing. Footstep audio as well plays a role, like no dead silence and stuff. I think all these things definitely play a role in the skill gap, but it's definitely very specific to certain Call of Duty, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. So which Call of Duties do actually have the largest skill gaps? Now this is just my opinion, of course. Let me know your opinion down in the comment section. But there is something in common with all of these Call of Duties that I'm about to talk about. Most of these Call of Duties are CODs that pro players really enjoyed. Like, they had a great time, and the Pro League season was actually pretty good. I'm not like a big fan of the Pro Leagues. I'm not like following them very closely, but just from what I've seen from some of the pro players, these tend to be the Call of Duties that they prefer for competitive specifically. And you would assume that they probably would prefer the Call of Duties with the higher skill gaps, considering they're really great players. So why wouldn't they want that? These Call of Duties include Advanced Warfare, no particular order by the way, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare. Those three I'm obviously going with because of the advanced movement, but also because they all had somewhat slower time to kills. They weren't like crazy slow, but they were definitely slower than the average Call of Duty. Black Ops 4 and Cold War as well, but those are obviously there for the time to kill reasons, the time to kill being a lot slower. And of course, the movement in those games were relatively fast, I would personally think so. And even the map design too, all very competitive. Black Ops 2 and World War II I think also fit, even though these Call of Duties don't have like a crazy slow time to kill. I would say World War II is close to being a slower time to kill, but it's definitely still more towards the middle. But the map design of Black Ops 2 and World War II I think just really definitely helped for the competitive nature of Call of Duty. So I do think those fit in there as well. And then as for the Call of Duties I think had the lowest skill gap, I do think Modern Warfare 2019 is definitely one of the biggest ones. I also think some of the original Modern Warfare games definitely fit in that category. I would argue Modern Warfare 2 is somewhat there. It's not as low as Ghosts in Modern Warfare 2019, but it's definitely around there somewhere. And something that's also important to note there, most of those Call of Duties that I just mentioned, excluding like one or two of them, are some of the most hated Call of Duties of all time. Like, that's the interesting thing, is that the games that have a higher skill gap tend to be the most hated Call of Duty titles. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get into that. So if I think the Call of Duty games with the highest skill gap tend to be the ones people hate the most, why do I think it's important for the game to have a higher skill gap? Now, of course, a lot of this is just personal preferences, because even those Call of Duty games that a lot of people hate, those are some of my favorites. So, of course, just because a lot of people hate them doesn't mean I have to hate them as well. I love those games. Black Ops 4, Cold War, Infinite Warfare, those are some of my favorite Call of Duties, but I'm very much aware of the fact that the community does not really like them. But I think it's important to have a skill gap for a few reasons. First of all, your skill actually matters, and that's obviously, the main point about skill gap, but that matters to me because if you play Call of Duty a bunch, like I've been playing for over 14 to 15 years at this point, I want that to matter. I want the progression I've had as a Call of Duty player to mean something. Of course, it's just a video game, right? It shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it is to a lot of people because they have put blood, sweat, and tears into this franchise, whether it's for their job or whether it's just as a hobby for fun. It should matter. It took me a while to get pretty good at Call of Duty. I was really bad for my first probably like 5 or 6 years of playing. I still had a great time. I didn't really care, but it took up to me until at least like Black Ops 2's life cycle for me to really start getting decent. And even to this day, I'm still finding ways to improve. And then every now and then, if I stop playing Call of Duty for a little bit, I'll get rusty. I didn't play much COD last year, and honestly, recently, I haven't been nearly as good as I think I was during like the 2019 to 2020 time frame. I was destroying lobbies in 2020 especially, but I haven't played much last year, so I feel like right now I'm a bit rusty. But if I keep playing Modern Warfare 2 and going back to some older Call of Duties, I think I will start to get a bit better, and then I can start destroying lobbies more like I used to. Of course, skill-based matchmaking does kind of make that a little bit harder, but you know what I mean, I could still do decently well, especially if I go to some older Call of Duties. But I want that skill to matter. I do think it's important to the franchise, and it's important to the longevity of it, because even the new players who are coming in now, the ones that are really trying to protect with skill-based matchmaking and the lower, skill gap, these players will get better eventually. So don't you want them to stick around? And I feel like they're more likely to stick around if they see that progression in their skill. But with skill-based matchmaking and a low skill gap, you're really not going to see that progression. You're going to see them kind of just be the same all the way through. They might be having a great time, but they're never going to get that sense of progression. And I do think when you don't feel like you're progressing in terms of your skill in something, you're going to get bored of it. And I do think that's what's even happening last couple years with Call of Duty. I mean, Vanguard, it was decently popular right away. I mean, there wasn't getting crazy sales or anything, but people were definitely playing it. And then really quickly, just shut down. People stopped playing. And I don't know if that's going to happen with Modern Warfare 2. I'm sure Warzone will definitely keep people interested. But I could definitely see that happening where people just don't really have as much interest in playing because they do feel like they're just kind of playing a turn your brain off simulator, which is what some of these lower skill gap Call of Duty games kind of sometimes feel like. I notice this a lot when I'm playing because if I play a game with a higher skill gap and I lose a gunfight, a lot of the times I'll internally feel like I deserve to lose that gunfight. Like, let's say I'm in a gunfight in Infinite Warfare and we're like boosting around and we've been having like a gunfight for a couple seconds and he outguns me. I might think to myself, yeah, I lost that gunfight because I got outgunned. Like, that was a fair loss on my part and it makes me want to get better. But if I'm loading up Modern Warfare 2 and I die because someone's camping in a room and then I just walk in and they just shoot me and I have no time to react because the time to kill is so fast and he was just camping there, he wasn't moving, that is not going to feel good. I'm not going to think, wow, I could have done something better there. The only thing I could have done differently is just somehow know that guy was in that room and like throw a concussion or a drill charge in there. But what if he was literally not moving and he was just aiming at that door? There is no way I'm just going to know someone's in there unless I force myself to slow down how I play, and now every room I walk into, I ADS before walking into it. That just slows down the game and leads me into some of my other problems with a fast time to kill Call of Duty game. Another thing I really think I have to bring up is skill-based matchmaking. Skill-based matchmaking is already there to protect bad players. So why do we need this extra system here, this extra system to protect bad players if there already is one in place? That's one thing I've really never been able to understand about the recent Call of Duty games, which is why I think skill-based matchmaking was so much more apparent in Cold War. Not because the system was different, I don't really think the system was different, but it was much more apparent because the skill gap was higher. So if you were to get into a lobby against like really good players in Cold War, you'd be screwed. Like, unless you were able to just really beef up your performance and just do better, then yeah, you were probably going to lose that game. You probably were, right? And it did feel unfair. That's one of my biggest issues with skill-based matchmaking is, yeah, it felt unfair because you're like, well, I mean, I did good and now I'm getting punished by playing, other really good people who are probably even better than me because it's not based on your full performance. It's based on your like past couple games performance or whatever. So it's not even a perfect system where it's going to match you up with your same skill level. It's just going to match you up with people who've been playing kind of like you the past couple games. So that's why skill-based matchmaking doesn't really have as much of an effect in these games with these really low skill gaps, because it's like, it doesn't really matter how good or bad the enemy team is. It's probably just gonna be like somewhat random most of the time. And I don't mean that in like the extreme way, right? That's why it still does matter. You can still have some level of skill in Modern Warfare 2. I'm not trying to act like it's inexistent, but it definitely is less than a game like Cold War, for example. So that is, I need to stress that because I feel like people in the comments are going to be like, well, actually, there definitely is yeah, of course there's a level of skill to it. It's just not nearly as much, which is why it still matters. Skill-based matchmaking definitely is still in the conversation because yeah, if I play against really good players, there is less of a chance I'm going to do better. But when you increase the skill gap, it's like, it kind of makes it a bigger challenge, which some people don't like that, but I personally kind of am okay with that, even though, of course, I don't want to be getting destroyed by really good players every game. But if I feel like it's the skill that's causing it, and it's not just the game's mechanics, then I don't really have as much of an issue with it. You know what I mean? I would prefer there to be no skill-based matchmaking and a high skill gap. That would be my preferred way, kind of like how we had it for like, well, no skill-based matchmaking as in reduced skill-based matchmaking. I don't mean literally none, but like Black Ops 4, Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, kind of like that. That's my preferred way, but I'm still going to prefer a skill gap rather than none, because like I said, skill-based matchmaking is not perfect. You're still going to be getting in lobbies with people who might be worse than you, might be the same level, might be a better. It's not always going to be the exact same skill level as you every single game, and your performance is always going to be different regardless. It's not like you're going to perform the exact same every single game. So yeah, in conclusion, I can totally understand why these developers prefer to have a lower skill gap, because yeah, majority of players are pretty bad, and majority of players are very casual and don't really care about, you know, getting better. They don't really care about all that. They just want to relax and whatever. So yeah, it's definitely helping them. It's definitely making them enjoy the game more. But I mean, even Vanguard didn't have much of a skill gap and people hated it anyways. So it's not like that's the only factor as to what's going to go into what's going to make Call of Duty popular and what's going to make it sell a lot, what's going to make it overall keep players interested in the game for longer periods of time. There's a lot that goes into it, but I do think skill gap is one of those, and that's why I understand it. Although, personally, I would prefer it the other way, and I could see them finding ways of making the skill gap increased, but still making those casual players still enjoy the game just as much. Like I said, skill-based matchmaking is one of those things. Obviously, it's already protecting them, so I don't really, see the big deal there. But another big thing is make the game fun even for players who aren't that good. I've been saying this for years. Call of Duty is not fun enough when you're shit. Most of the time, you're having a terrible time if you're doing bad. And that is the biggest issue, because that's what makes people hate skill-based matchmaking. That's what makes people not enjoy their time without it. Like, let's say they're a bad player, then of course, no skill-based matchmaking, they're not gonna enjoy their time either. So if you want everyone to enjoy their time, you gotta just make the game fun regardless of how good they're doing. You can't just make it so players are always going to have an equal chance of doing really good, because then you remove the skill gap and you make it so being good does not matter. I'm not gonna act like I know what's best for Call of Duty, but that's just the way I see it. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. I will see you all on the next one. Peace out.